Ava was desperate for a job. Fresh out of college, she had no work experience, no connections, and just enough savings to get her through the month. So when she stumbled upon the ad for an entry-level customer service role at a company she'd never heard of, she clicked on it without a second thought. The job description was vague, seeking highly motivated individuals for unique work environment, no experience needed, competitive pay. It sounded too good to be true, but Ava's options were slim. She filled out the application, hit submit, and went to bed with her phone on silent, determined to ignore her fears. The next morning, a response was waiting in her inbox. Interview invitation. Report to Pergatech Inc. tonight at 10 p.m. Weird hour for an interview, she thought, but shrugged it off. Maybe the job catered to night shifts, or maybe the place just preferred unconventional hours. Either way, she dressed in her best attempt at office professional and took a bus into the city. When she arrived, she found herself standing in front of a looming gray building with no sign, just the address and Pergatech Inc. stenciled on the door. She walked in, trying to shake off the chills that crawled up her spine. The air felt stale, as if it had been trapped inside for decades. A faint humming noise echoed from somewhere deep within. The receptionist, a thin man with colorless eyes, gestured her toward a waiting room with nothing but bare walls and a flickering light. 3 others sat waiting, each casting nervous glances at the door. Ava took a seat and tried to relax. Next to her was a stocky older man with a thick salt and pepper beard, his face lined with the kind of weariness that told her he'd seen a lot in his life. He caught her looking and smiled gently. "Name's Nate," he said in a gruff voice, extending his hand. "Guess you're here for the interview, too?" "Yeah," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm Ava." They both turned when the next person in line cleared her throat, a young woman with a lean frame, wearing a hoodie pulled low over her eyes. "I'm Sam," she said, her voice low and rough. Her gaze was intense, and her handshake surprisingly strong. The last person was a woman in her mid-30s, with long locks spilling over her shoulders. She had an air of calm about her despite the eerie atmosphere. "Jasmine," she said softly, glancing at the others with a knowing look. Before they could ask each other any more questions, the receptionist reappeared and led them to a long hallway lined with cubicles. It was dark except for the occasional dim bulb casting strange shadows on the walls. The silence felt heavy, pressing down on them like a physical weight. At the end of the hall, they stopped in front of a door marked simply "Evaluation Room." Inside was a long, sterile room with cold metal chairs lined up against one wall. In the center of the room was a tall figure, dressed impeccably in a suit. His face was all sharp angles and hollow cheeks, his eyes dark and unblinking. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice as smooth as silk. "I am Mr. Vale. This is your interview and your first test." Ava exchanged uneasy glances with the others. "Test," she echoed, voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Vale smiled, revealing unnaturally sharp teeth. "Yes, it's quite simple. Make it through the maze of cubicles and reach the exit at the other side." He paused, savoring the looks of confusion and unease on their faces. "Each cubicle is a different experience. Some will test your endurance, some your intelligence, and some, well, your will to survive." Nate's brow furrowed and Sam tensed, glancing at Jasmine, who took a deep breath, her eyes narrowing. Ava's stomach twisted with dread. This was all wrong, but before she could voice her doubts, the door slammed shut behind them. The only way forward was into the maze. They walked together at first, glancing nervously at each other. They soon came upon the first cubicle, where flickering computer screens glowed dimly. A rancid smell filled the air, and Ava's eyes began to water. There, sprawled across the desk, was a mannequin dressed in a shredded suit, its plastic face frozen in a grimace. "Don't look away," Jasmine warned in a low whisper. Ava tried to steady herself, keeping her eyes locked on the mannequin's face, but as she did, its mouth twisted and moved, forming a grotesque grin. A voice echoed from nowhere, cold and hollow. "You can't hide here, it knows you." Panicked, Ava broke eye contact, and the mannequin shot upright, its hand reaching toward her. She stumbled back, narrowly avoiding its grasp, and Nate grabbed her arm, pulling her onward as they fled to the next row of cubicles. One by one, they faced more horrors. In one cubicle, hundreds of disembodied voices whispered their deepest fears, amplified and warped until it was impossible to think straight. In another, shadowy figures flitted in and out of sight, leaving trails of icy cold in their wake. Nate stayed close, his eyes steely, while Sam muttered reassurances to herself, pushing them forward, one step at a time. Jasmine, calm and focused, seemed almost unfazed, though her hands trembled ever so slightly as they gripped her shirt. Finally, they reached a cubicle that was silent. The dim light buzzed overhead, casting sickly shadows across the floor. "What's this one?" Ava whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. "It's a trap," Jasmine muttered, eyeing the cubicle's entrance. "Stay close and don't look back. Whatever you do, don't let it see fear." But before they could move forward, a figure stepped into view, a pale, hollow-eyed version of herself. Ava's chest tightened as she watched her own face sneer back at her, the mouth twisting into a monstrous, mocking grin. The thing that wore her face stepped toward her, arms outstretched. "Ava," it cooed in a warped version of her voice. "Ava, you'll never leave.